so much, Jenna. I just want to quickly thank December Magazine. This is such an amazing opportunity, and Young Chicago Authors for letting us be in this space. Both organizations do so much work to support new writers and new writing, and we should absolutely support them in turn. Gemma did a lot more introducing than I was expecting, but I am going to read from the end of something else, so I'll give you a little bit more background information. It follows Ellie, who is a 17-year-old high school student in a rural town in Michigan where everyone is a Seventh-day Adventist, which is a pretty strict religion, and everyone grows grapes. And Ellie really, really wants to go to college, but at the beginning of the story, she finds out that there's no money and she's not allowed. And so the story follows her over the course of her final year of school as she kind of grows more distant from her community and her family and starts rebelling a little bit. And there are two things that really bring Ellie solace over the course of this year. One is that her two little brothers have these pigs, Walter and Alma, and they're raising them for a livestock auction because they're in the 4-H club. And Ellie has this really deep relationship with these pigs. They're kind of like her pets. She really loves them. They kind of give her some comfort. And the other thing is this friendship that she develops with a boy named James, who is another social outcast because it is rumored that his older sister is a heroin addict. And so the two things kind of converge during the summer when Ellie is restless and bored, and that's what I'm going to read for you. Summer. During the summer, hang your trellis systems with mesh netting in order to keep animals away from the fruit. Check the nets daily. Sometimes, things may get caught in them, like birds or large insects. Those things will then die, and their corpses will cast misshapen shadows on the grapes. When grapes are in shadow, they do not grow properly. If you find dead things in the nets, pick them off carefully so as not to disturb the fruit. Carry a garbage bag with you to hold the corpses. Do not leave the corpses on the ground. If you do, wild animals will come, and those animals may tear up the crops. Dead birds will feel a bit strange to the touch at first. Signs of dizziness and nausea are not uncommon. But after a few weeks, the corpses will inspire no feeling in you whatsoever. You will wander by yourself through the aisles between the trellises, just like you did during the winter, cradling the dead birds. You may not tend to think of yourself as a lonely person, but you'll find that you are. A distinct type of heat oppresses Berrien Springs in August. It's the kind of dense, sticky heat that slows the passage of time, the kind of heat that kills livestock, the kind of heat that augments the everyday boredom and general futility of a rural Midwestern summer, the kind of heat that makes you want to set a pasture on fire and watch it burn just for the sake of having something to do. Every August in Berrien Springs was basically the same. Ellie helped prune her parents' grapes. She hedged them. She made sure that every shoot would only bear one cluster. Day after day, she worked alone on the farm in the 90-degree heat, in air so muggy and generally wet that she wouldn't have known at first if it had started to rain, and even then, the rain wouldn't have provided much relief from the implacable sun. After she finished her work, she heaved herself back inside to take shelter in the air conditioning and the quasi-entertainment of a television show she'd already seen 4 times through. Ellie was in the middle of just such a show when her mother sent her out to the Apple Valley on the Friday evening that preceded the opening of the Berrien County Youth Fair. "Ellen," said her mother, "are you sure that it's the best time to be watching television? When the sun is going to set before 8 tonight?" "Can I finish the episode?" Ellie asked. Her mother sighed. Ellie shut off the TV. "I'm going," she said. "I'm going. Don't be like that." "Thank you, sweetheart," said Ellie's mother. Ellie knew the commandments by heart. Honor thy mother and father, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Her mother enforced them all with an iron will and an air of sacrifice. She had martyred herself for her grapes and for the lives of her children. But you know, Ellie said, it doesn't really matter. I don't have the energy to argue with you right now, Ellen. Go. Ellie was not listening. What difference would it make if we were a little late to the table one time? What would happen? It would be disrespectful on the Sabbath, disobedient. So, what would change? Think harder before you speak, Ellen. You're headed down the wrong path. No, I'm not. I'm already stuck here. What does it matter? I need you to go get the groceries, please. Ellie slept deeply that night and dreamed of sheep marching one by one into a hazy fire on the horizon. Their death screams were drowned out by the lowing of the fairground cows. It was that sound, the thunderous, reverberating sound that the cows made upon the ringing of the Berrien County Youth Fair's opening bell, that Ellie heard when she woke the next morning. Every year, it was the same. The Millers rose with the opening bell, ate a rapid breakfast, and made their way together to the northeast corner of the fairgrounds, near the historical tents and the rabbits. As a little girl, Ellie spent endless amounts of time in the rabbit tents. But as she got older, she'd found herself increasingly subject to the will of the fair. There's a certain way that the fair pulls you along, deeper and deeper into its interior. It has something to do with the way that the vast crowd moves, away from the amusement rides and food stands and commercial displays and pretty show horse rings that line the fair's outskirts, and in toward something more primal, toward the sheep and the swine and the poultry and the show arena where the judging of the animals took place, toward the buildings that distinguished themselves by smell rather than by the colorful faces of the signs on their doors. Ellie made her way wordlessly through the interior of the fair, alone on the grounds with her parents for the first time in her conscious memory, since Luke and Paul had gone off to register Walter and Alma for the hog competition and the livestock auction. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun was unbearably strong, and Ellie's mother was cooing at the dairy cows. They lowed at her in answer and rolled their eyes back into their skulls so that Ellie could see only the whites of their eyeballs. The farmers used riding crops to beat the cows that didn't walk properly and strapped them too tightly into milking machines. "Aren't you a sweet girl?" Ellie's mother said to a nursing heifer. "The end is nigh," the cows said in unison. "Sure is loud in here," said Ellie's father. "Let's go, please," Ellie said. "It should be about time to go watch the boys," Ellie's mother said. Ellie could not watch Walter and Alma walk circles around the ring. She could not hear their weights read aloud into a microphone. She could not watch their faces, their eyes, the way their ears would twitch at the sound of their own names. "May I go home?" Ellie said. "Ellen," said her father, "you've been acting miserably for months. You've embarrassed us in the eyes of our neighbors and the church. You've tormented your siblings. You've been absolutely selfish, and I'm sick of it. Your mother is sick of it. You will stop it now." Ellie lowered her head in her eyes, and she went with her parents. The grandstand stood in front of the show and test drive area for the John Deere tractors that people could buy at the fair for a marked-down price. She noticed some boys from her class there, taking joyrides on the biggest machines, the kind that everyone wanted but no one could afford. James was not among them, and so Ellie turned her attention back to the hog show. Perhaps, Ellie thought, if she was her parents' test, then the fair was hers. The 4-H boys stood in a neat line behind the show ring. They walked with their shoulders back and their noses pointed halfway up to heaven when they showed their animals. They were proud of their work, and the fair was all about this sort of pride. And when the boys handed their pigs over to the auctioneer, they didn't seem at all sad. They couldn't smell the blood. Luke and Paul walked Walter and Alma into the ring. Luke turned and raised his hand to wave at his parents and his sister, and took another step, and Walter bolted. Walter weighed 450 pounds, and he was angry and afraid, and so nobody in the area managed to stop him before he made it out the back door of the tent. As if from a great distance, Ellie saw Luke's face go pale, and she heard the duel scream, Luke's desperate "Walter!" and the swine's angry cry as her brother's prize hog ran directly into the test drive area for the tractors. The collision sounded like an earthquake. Ellie felt as if she'd had the wind knocked out of her. She didn't know where she wanted to go when she took off at a run, and she could barely hear her parents as they shouted at her back. She worked her way west and out, past the goats and the dairy cows, past the rabbits, past the food stands, and all the way over to the carnival rides. Nobody went to the carnival rides except for the absolute youngest children and tourists. But when Ellie reached the rides, she understood what she'd been running for: space. The carnival rides occupied a broad, open plateau, and nobody was there except for the few townies working the ride booths. She wandered from one machine to the next and felt safe. She could breathe. She almost wanted to pray. "Hey, Ellie," someone said. Ellie looked around. There were a few kids nearby, but none of them noticed her. The only other person in sight was the townie working the tilt-a-whirl, and he was waving at her. She took a few steps closer to the ride and saw that it was James. He called her name again. She waved back. "I didn't know you worked here," she said. She sat down on the base of the tilt-a-whirl. "Since we were freshmen," he said, like the second I was old enough to get a job. "Why here?" she asked. "It's sort of peaceful down here, with just the rides," he said. "And they hire anyone." "Must be nice," she said, "to get away from all the fair stuff, as much as you can." "Yeah," he said. They were quiet for a while. Ellie realized that she'd been crying and tried to wipe her eyes before James noticed. But he saw. "Hey," he said, "come look at this thing." She followed him behind the tilt-a-whirl booth into a little wooden shed full of tools for fixing rides. "They make you fix everything too?" she asked. "If the rides break, sure," he said, "but that doesn't happen much. Mostly, I just like to hide out back here, away from everything." "Yeah," she said. She was almost certain that she knew what was going to happen next. She told herself that the only reason she could feel her pulse in her eardrums was because she'd run across the entirety of the fairground. He leaned toward her. But he didn't lean in all the way. Instead, he pulled something out of his back pocket. James had a syringe. He tapped it. He held it out like a sacrament. And Ellie couldn't say that she hadn't seen this part coming either. James hadn't offered her anything, but he hadn't asked her to leave. And so she stayed with him. James got everything ready. His motions were practiced, precise. When he held out his arm, Ellie turned away. She didn't want to watch. If she knew, it would ruin everything. As the ritual went on, the sides of the shed seemed to become transparent, and Ellie felt that she could see the entire fairground from where she stood. She knew that the second coming was close at hand. Walter led the march of the righteous up to heaven. The cows followed behind him. In 2 weeks, it would be September. It would be time to harvest the grapes. Thanks.